We get started, just a shout out to our valued partners in this webinar, including NEDPA, OSHA, Belize Healthcare Network, and also New York Department of Labor, as well as Upstate, Cayuga, DFA, ProDairy, and New York Farm Bureau, as well as a disclaimer that all this information is presented in good faith. So I will now turn it over to Tanya Van Syke, who is our moderator for today's webinar.
Thank you, Kyle, and thank you to Farm Credit East for hosting this webinar once again. We were chatting this morning before all of you came on, and we realized that in August it will be 10 years since the New York Dairy OSHA LEP was announced. So in August 2013, we heard that that we were going to have an LEP. We went to work. We brought in experts in safety, and they teamed up with NYCAM and a group of us, and we traveled the state doing training on what it would mean to have an OSHA inspection. And since then, you as an industry have been dedicated to continuous improvement. In addition to all your efforts on your farms, there's been a team of us who've been working together alongside with OSHA to make sure that we have periodic meetings and that we're all understanding what it means to have continuous improvement dedication on our farms and bring value and information to all of you, which is what we're doing today. So first, I'd like to thank my fellow committee members, Lisa Ford from Cayuga Marketing, Jim Caraba and Anna Meyerhoff from NYCAM, Jennifer Hewson from DFA, Sarah Gillette in Madison from Upstate Niagara, Dr. Richard Stupp from Cornell University Ag Workforce Program, Lauren Williams from New York Farm Bureau, my colleague Alyssa Keeley from NEDPA, and in the early years, Carl Zimick was a highly dedicated member of our team, so a shout out to Carl for all of his work in helping us in the early years. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists today and begin the program. We have with us today Jim Caraba and Ann Meyerhoff from NYCAM. We can't thank NYCAM enough for all of their hard work and dedication. We have Nick Donofrio from
I don't know what happened.
works with us, as well as
we got cut off somehow.
from the New York State Department of Labor on-site consultation program. Our first speakers today are Anna and Jim, so I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, Rebecca, it's Dwayne Martin. Somehow we got
there before. Now they are. So a lot of you are familiar with NYCAM, the New York Center for Agricultural Medicine and Health. We're a nonprofit organization. We're based in Cooperstown, New York, but we cover the whole state. We're a Department of Bassett Healthcare Network, which is a large hospital based in Cooperstown. So we're not part of OSHA. We're not part of the Department of Labor. We're a nonprofit, though we do get grant funding from the State Department of Labor and the State Department of Health to do a lot of the work that we do. And we've been a part of the New York OSHA work group, like Tanya said, that we formed back in late 2013 to help dairy farms become in compliance with the impending OSHA LEP. So we work very closely with all these groups to help farms get into compliance. And I just want to say a big thank you to NEDPA and New York Farm Bureau and all the producers that have helped us try to get an increase to our state funding. We haven't had a budget increase from the State Department of Health since 2009, but everything else has gone up a lot too. So that's really impacted our ability to go out around the state and do the work that we do. And actually in this last year, we've had to refuse requests from farms to go out and do training for them because they were too far for us to travel. We didn't have the funds to travel around the state like we used to. So hopefully we will see an increase in our budget. It's long overdue, and it's going to really help us to get out there and help the producers to train their people and to help make their places safer. So just a big thank you to everyone in the industry that has made calls on our behalf to try to get our funding increased. We do receive funding from the State Department of Labor Hazard Abatement Board for our on-farm safety program. So most of the funding we get from the Department of Labor goes to our on-farm safety program. There's two main parts to this, so safety surveys or safety audits, and then also safety training. And this is available to any type of agricultural business. We go to a lot of dairy farms, a lot of vegetable farms and orchards, but we can go to any commodity. And I think I've been to every type of farm, from oyster farms to now marijuana farms. So, uh, and the safety surveys, the safety audit, it is, the goal of that is just to try to identify any hazards that a farm might have. And if we did see something that needed to be improved, we would give suggestions on how to do that. We also provide consultation services at no charge. So I get a lot of calls and sometimes emails from producers about, what do I need to do about this certain thing in order to be in compliance with OSHA? So you can always call us or email me, for that kind of help. And then we have developed written programs for each of the 12 OSHA dairy dozen areas. So we have template written programs. So those are available. And when I do a safety survey for dairy farms that want to come into OSHA compliance, we'll share those written template programs, or, I could send them to any farm that wants it to. And then to evaluate our program, we usually call farms back a few months later to see if any improvements were made based on the safety survey that we did for them. One of the resources that we have that might interest you folks is on our website at www.nycam.com. We do have a page dedicated to the New York Dairy LEP. So there's a lot of resources at that page that you could look at and to help you at your farms. We have a downloadable checklist. So if you wanted to do a safety check, on your own, you could download that checklist. And then we have some other materials that can help you with the dairy dozen areas that are outlined in the LEP. One of the newer programs that we have, and it's actually not that new because we started in December 2015, but it's one of the newer ones that we have, is the John May Farm Safety Fund. So this is a cost-sharing program to make safety improvements on small to mid-sized farms. And for a project to be eligible for this, it has to be directly related to improve safety on the farm. But it's a pretty simple application process. You just have to be a resident of New York State, active or active farmer, either full or part-time. Could be any type of commodity. The gross farm, there's two other criteria. So an annual gross farm income of 10,000 to 350,000, or we just made this change about 2 months ago. You could be eligible for this if you're a dairy farm milking fewer than 1,000 cows. So as I said, it's a simple application process. You could go to our website and download the application. It would involve a safety survey from NYCAM. So one of our educators would go out to the farm to do a full safety survey of the farm, but also to look at the safety improvement that you wanted to do with the grant. It'll pay 50% of the cost of the improvement up to a max of $5,000. Most of the projects that we've done with this have been beef cattle squeeze chutes and related cattle handling equipment. But for dairy farms, we've done some electrical upgrades to the electrical systems in barns and buildings, some emergency eye wash stations, and then fixed ladders like on silos. So those are some of the things we've done for dairy farms. We do sell personal protective equipment too at low cost. So there's all types of different personal protective equipment you could get from us. We sell SMV emblems and also retrofit PTO shields that are pretty reasonably cost and meet all the latest standards for PTO shielding. And then another program that maybe a lot of you are familiar with is our ROPS retrofit rebate program. We first launched this in November 2006, but it's now become a national program. So in 2010, it went national, but there's only funding in 5 other states now. But New York has a pretty generous rebate. It'll pay 70% of the cost of a rebate to retrofit a non-ROPS tractor with ROPS. And in New York, you won't pay more than $500 out-of-pocket cost to do that. So that concludes my part of the presentation. Now I'll hand it off to Anna Meyerhoff, and she'll talk a little bit more about the training that we do.
All right, thank you, Jim. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our safety trainings and our print materials because Jim already went over a lot of our other programs. So the first thing is dairy safety training. I am actually coming at you live from a farm where I'm doing some training today, and I just dropped off some PTO shields. We do a lot of Spanish language training, that's me, and then we do all of the topics for things like the Dairy Dozen. So a lot of equipment related, tractors and skid steers. We do training on protective equipment and respirators. We do any of the HAZCOM or chemical safety, and then a lot on animal handling. Recently, we added a module for the FARM program on moving down cows safely. So basically anything you can think of that relates to the hazards of working on a dairy farm, we have a training module for workers, and all of our trainings are English and Spanish. We also offer first aid and CPR training, and those are funded in the Department of Health. So those include, I have a random toolbar in front of me, basic classes on just what to do in an emergency. I developed a program for dairy-focused type emergencies that just covers everything in about an hour, but we also do offer the full certification through the American Heart Association. Jim and Christina and I are instructors, so we can do CPR, how to use a defibrillator, how to use naloxone, and then first aid. So that's a lot more time intensive, but if farms do want certification, we offer that. We have a fire safety and fire extinguisher hands-on demo, which is pretty fun for workers. You can see down on the left that they get to put out a real fire, but in a safe way. And we cover things like being aware of fire hazards, what to do and where to go if there is an emergency, and then everybody gets to practice with the demo. So we do respirator fit testing. A lot of this is for fruit and vegetable, but we offer it to dairies as well. If people are using certain chemicals like for foot baths or people who are pesticide applicators, we get them fit for a respirator that works for them, and we do all of the worker education on how to properly wear it and clean it and store it so that they have what they need. We also do sell half-face respirators and replacement parts and cartridges through our PPE program that Jim mentioned. We have a lot of print materials that we've developed over the years, and the newest ones are a farm worker safety handbook that's a comic book, but we have a dairy version now that's supposed to be just a basic welcome to the farm. Here are some hazards you might encounter. It's supposed to be part of farm orientation. That's what we developed it to be used as. We also have another comic book that's focused on body pain, lifting and carrying, and stretches for farm workers to feel better at work. I do want to plug a new program that I'm involved in that's helping a little bit with me being able to travel and do funding related going out to farms. This is a collaboration with the University of Vermont, and basically I am having way too much fun doing 30-minute interviews about safety with Spanish-speaking workers on dairy farms here in New York. So we want to develop some new safety training topics based on what the workers are saying they're interested in. Everything's totally private. It's a half hour. They get $25. They don't have to answer every single question if there's something they don't want to. But if anybody is interested in having me come to your farm, I'm asking everyone permission in the first place before I do it. But a lot of workers are happy to share their experiences. I've gotten a lot of good feedback, and stay tuned because I will be publishing some findings from that. So far, I have done 40 interviews and I'm hoping to do 100. So if anybody wants to help me out, please do. So that is all I have, and thank you for inviting us on the webinar.
Sure, yes, hi. Can you see my slide there?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone. My name is Nick D'Onofrio, and I'm a compliance assistant specialist with OSHA in Region 2, which is New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide an OSHA update today to the dairy community in New York State. Today, I'm going to be briefly reviewing the changes in the Department of Labor leadership, discussing our philosophy on safety in the workplace, give you an update on the changes to OSHA's enforcement strategy, review this year's outreach activities, and focus on OSHA's top 10 violations, and the results of dairy inspections across the United States, the federal OSHA, and review some of the Region 2 outreach plans. So I just have to put my disclaimer out there as well. You can tell this was written by our legal department. So basically cutting through all the whereas and as per the conditions listed above legalese. What I'm providing today is information for educational purposes. It doesn't place any new regulations or requirements on you as an employer, but it's, again, for information and educational purposes. So we did have a change in the Department of Labor, the United States Department of Labor. Marty Walsh has left the United States Department of Labor. Doug Parker remains the head of OSHA, but we now have an acting Secretary of Labor. Her name is Julie Sue. She was formerly the Deputy Secretary of Labor in the United States Department of Labor. Prior to coming to the federal government, Ms. Sue worked as the Labor Secretary in California. She is a civil rights attorney, and one of her landmark cases was representing Thai garment workers who are being trafficked in the U.S. and forced to work under inhumane conditions. She does speak multiple languages, and she is the President Biden's nomination for Secretary of Labor. She has not been confirmed yet, so she is the acting Secretary of Labor. So just quickly review the New York OSHA offices. There are 6 OSHA offices in New York, and the dairy LEP involves 90% of the geographic area of New York for the 3 upstate OSHA area offices, and that is Buffalo, Syracuse, and Albany. So if you ask people what they value most in their life, most will say it's the health and safety of their loved ones. And we hold our family's health and safety as a fundamental core value, but too often we don't live by this value when it comes to how we design, supervise, and perform our work. So our goal with OSHA is to align this basic fundamental shared value, that is this health and safety of our families, with this core value of every workplace in America, and to ensure that each workplace has equitable and inclusive and reaching proactively to all workers in all of our efforts. So OSHA is determined to proactively address the needs of a constantly changing and diverse workforce, and we support the Secretary of Labor's vision of ensuring that workers have a good job that are safe and healthy, and that each worker returns home and safe and sound each day. The saying that we have in the Department of Labor is, a good job is a safe job. So generally speaking, we believe companies, employers can be grouped into 3 categories. The first category is those businesses that hold safety as a core value and make safety as part of their culture. We want to hold those companies up as role models, as other companies to emulate on how they manage safety and health in the workplace. There are a few companies in that area, in that type of, or in that area of the graph, but most companies are in the middle. Most companies want to do the right thing, but they need a little guidance, a little help to get to that point of embracing and having safety as a core value. And then there are those companies, hopefully a small number, who disregard safety and put workers at risk. And for that, OSHA will continue to use all the tools we have available to enforce our workplace standards so that we can protect workers' safety and health. Each year, OSHA focuses its outreach efforts towards those hazards which have an effect on workers in those particular industries. So each year we publish and support a list of outreach events in an effort to raise awareness about specific hazards in particular industry sectors. While these hazards may not be present in your particular workplace, these stand-downs, these safety stand-downs, are an opportunity for all employers to educate and inform their workers about specific hazards and talk with them about the hazards in their particular workplace. So you can see next week is Stand Up for Grain Safety. And then in early April, we will talk about National Work Zone Safety Awareness. These are some of the focus areas and some of the initiatives that OSHA has planned for 2023. Warehousing and storage is one of the most dangerous industries in private sector. In fact, 2019 Bureau of Labor Statistics data indicates that their days away from work injury rate is twice the average of all private industries. This industry sector employs more than 1 million workers. 25% of those are Black or African American, and 34% of those are Hispanic. And consistently, fork truck violations appear in OSHA's top 10 most frequently cited standards. So we believe that by establishing a baseline of fork truck hazards in this industry, we will increase outreach and abatement of these hazards through inspection and compliance assistance. We'll also be focusing on heat. This is the second year we'll have our heat national emphasis program. This is targeted to employers where heat is a hazard. It's also set up to inform and educate employers and workers about the hazards of heat. We will continue our site-specific targeted inspection, and we will also focus on the healthcare industry, expecting a standard on preventing COVID exposure in the healthcare industry. Let me just take a minute to review some of the inspection data from fiscal year 22. This is a list of the top 10 OSHA violations throughout the United States for general industry and construction. A couple things to note about this top 10. 40% of those top 10 violations have to do with falls. Number 1, fall protection. 4, ladders. 5, scaffolding. And number 8, fall protection training. So the numbers indicate the position of this particular violation in FY21, the preceding year. If the number is green, that means the number of violations have gone up or increased year over year. If the number is red, that means the number of violations have actually decreased year over year. The other thing I'll point out is you can see hazard communication is number 2 on the list for FY22. Consistently, year over year, hazard communication appears in the top 10. And you can see that last year it was number 5 in FY21. The other thing I'll point out is number 7, powered industrial fork trucks. Again, that consistently makes the list of OSHA top 10 violations. Let's drill down specifically and look at dairy farm inspections. Again, these are dairy farm inspections by federal OSHA since October 1st, 2021 until March 1st of this year. There were a total of 29 dairy farm inspections conducted throughout the United States. Interestingly enough, 25% or 7 of those were conducted in New York State, followed by Wisconsin and then Idaho and Colorado. Unfortunately, 2 of those 7 involved fatalities. The most cited standards for dairy farm inspections for the last fiscal year were 7 HAZCOM violations, 5 were general duty clause. Those are violations where we don't particularly have a standard, but we can use a recognized standard to cite a hazard that we see in the workplace. 5 were specifically cited under the agricultural standard, and 6 had to do with lockout. Those 5 specific agricultural related standards were reviewing operating instructions initially and then annually thereafter, making sure everyone is clear before starting, engaging, or operating machines, making sure equipment is stopped, power disconnected before service and maintenance. One had to do with power takeoff shielding, and the last one was guarding of nip points, belts, chains, sprockets, sheaths, pulleys, etc. So what's new with OSHA? Well, effective March 30th, U visas and T visas will be issued by OSHA. This allows victims of specific crimes to help law enforcement detect, investigate, and prosecute crimes without fear of retaliation based on their immigration status. These visas provide immigration status to non-citizen victims and allow them to remain in the United States to assist authorities in combating human trafficking and other crimes. For the first time, OSHA will be able to issue these visa certifications during its workplace safety investigations. When the agency identifies qualifying criminal activities, including manslaughter, trafficking, extortion, felonious assault, forced labor, and obstruction of justice. So as the Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health, Doug Parker, said, workers in the United States need to feel empowered and be able to trust OSHA and the United States Department of Labor enough to voice their concerns about workplace safety, regardless of their immigration status and fears of retaliation. And by enabling OSHA to issue U&T visa certifications, we will be empowering some of our economy's most vulnerable workers to tell us if their jobs are jeopardizing their safety and health and that of their coworkers. And this will also support our enforcement efforts. We also issued 2 new enforcement guidelines. Beginning next Monday, OSHA may begin to cite instance by instance, and I'll talk about that in just a minute and give you some examples. This applies to general industry, construction, you can see agriculture and maritime industries. We were also given the authority to cite, again, instant by instance. These are for high gravity, serious violations, specifically those hazards dealing with lockout, tagout, machine guarding, permanent required confined space, respiratory protection, falls, trenching, and so on. The intent here is to ensure full authority of the OSHA Act to discourage non-compliance. So what do we mean by instance citation? Well, typically when there are more than one condition or more than one piece of equipment that has the same hazard or violation of a particular standard, in this case, there are 2 instances where guards or gears were not guarded. So we listed instance A and instance B. Under this new guidance, which becomes effective on Monday, we have the ability to issue 2 citations and break out A and B and allow them to stand on their own and be issued as separate citations. The other new enforcement guidance is to use existing authority that we have to not group closely related violations. Typically, when we find similar hazards in hazard communication or respiratory protection or lockout tagout or fall protection or scaffolding, we typically group similar types of hazards found in those regulations. Under this new enforcement guidance, again, this is existing authority, it's not particularly new, it's just a reminder to employers that we always had the authority not to group, but many times we choose to group. And again, that's up to the discretion of the area director on whether grouping or not grouping will get that abatement that the area director is looking for on a case-by-case basis with each specific inspection. So again, here's an example. So we have an inspection, we have several instances. Again, under the previous example, we now have the ability to cite these separately, but you can see this is citation 1, item 2A, and then we have citation 1, item 2B. Under this new authority, if the area director so chooses, they can decouple or ungroup these and cite each one of these as a separate violation. I have to mention that as a reminder, each year since 2015, OSHA has been given the authority to increase the penalty amounts, and it's based on the inflation rate. These are the maximum penalties for each of these types of violations. These are some of the focus areas that OSHA Region 2 is going to be focusing our outreach in, reducing fatalities and serious injuries in the New Jersey area based on an alliance that we have. We're going to be rolling out a Beat the Heat contest nationally and I have a few slides to talk about that briefly. And then we're also going to be doing some outreach to underserved workers. We're also going to be highlighting these outreach events throughout the year, the work zone safety, the fall stand down that I talked about previously. We're going to be having lunch and learns to try to motivate our stakeholders to hold safety stand downs during these weeks of national stand down events. So real briefly and wrapping this up, heat is a hazard. Annually, thousands of workers become sick and about 40 workers die each year because of heat-related illnesses. We believe this is underreported because many times these types of fatalities go misdiagnosed. And when we think of heat as a hazard, we always think, or more often think of outdoor heat, agriculture, construction, landscaping, but indoor heat can also be a hazard, and it can happen anytime. So what OSHA is doing nationally, we're going to be launching a Beat the Heat contest. And we want to identify the most innovative, effective awareness methods to communicate heat as a hazard and to raise employer and employee awareness. That can be a logo, it can be an informational booklet, it can be a toolkit, it can be a catchphrase. But our goal is to educate our stakeholders, especially workers and employers, about heat as a hazard. We want to prevent heat illness by creating an awareness campaign. We want to highlight the dangers, and bottom line, we want to motivate employers and workers to take action to prevent themselves heat. The prizes that we have are letters of appreciation, a Beat the Heat challenge coin, and then most importantly, winners are going to be publicized on OSHA.gov, our quick takes that go out twice a month, and also our newsletter that we send out. So that wraps up my portion. And again, thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on what's new with.
Thank you, Nick.
So Alexander, we just see your regular desktop there. There we go. We can see your slides now. And you are muted as well still.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you and see your slides.
All right, wonderful. All right, great. So anyways, I'll just go ahead and get started. But first off, thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this. And thank you to Nick for suggesting that I be a part of this. So this is great. Okay, so the presentation, it's on-site consultation for dairy farms. And there's my name. It was misspelled for some reason at the beginning of all this, the introduction. So it's Alexander, Grigorenko. And there's my contact info, my phone number, 716-847-7664, my email address, alexander.grigorenko@labor.ny.gov, and I'll provide this information at the end as well if anyone needs to reach out to me. So Nick had asked me to briefly touch on something before I delve into the meat and bones of the presentation here today. So there's a appropriations rule with respect to OSHA being able to conduct inspections on certain employers. So I'm going to show this slide now. I'm not going to get into it at the moment, and I'm going to go back to the slide after I explain it in further detail. So the Appropriations Act, it exempts small farming operations from enforcement of all rules, regulations, standards, or orders under the Occupational Safety and Health Act. A farming operation is exempt from all OSHA activities if it, 1, employs 10 or fewer employees currently and at all times during the last 12 months, and 2, has not had an active temporary labor camp during the preceding 12 months. And also there's a little note there, family members of farm employees are not counted when determining the number of employees. So your family members don't count toward that 10. All right, so B, a farming operation with 10 or fewer employees that maintains a temporary labor camp or has maintained a temporary labor camp within the last 12 months is not exempt from inspection. So again, if you've had a temporary labor camp, then you're not exempt from inspection, even if your farm typically employs fewer than those 10 employees. Anyhow, so for OSHA, the inspection in this instance may include all working conditions covered by OSHA standards except for field sanitation. That's 1928-110, and except as noted, temporary labor camps 1910-142, which are being enforced by the Wage and Hour Division under Secretary of Labor Order 6-96. A lot of technical information there, I guess, you know, the order number and everything, but just want to convey to you how some of you who have very small farms may be exempt. So anyhow, OSHA in this instance, however, does retain inspection responsibility for those camps of employees engaged in eggs or poultry production or red meat production, or engaged in the post-harvest processing of agricultural or horticultural commodities. Generally, post-harvest processing can be thought of as changing the character of the product, canning, making cider or sauces, etc., or a higher degree of packaging, washing, bundling, bagging carrots versus field sorting in a shed for size. C, the Wage and Hour Division will also exercise responsibility for enforcement in agriculture of OSHA field sanitation and temporary labor camp standards, except as noted in B above, in 9 states operating OSHA-approved state plans, which have elected to follow the jurisdictional transfer of authority. So these states are Alaska, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Minnesota, South Carolina, Utah, Virgin Islands, and Wyoming. And then in the 14 other states operating OSHA-approved state plans, enforcement of field sanitation and temporary labor camp standards in agriculture will not transfer to ESA and will continue to be state responsibility. So those states are Arizona, California, Hawaii, Maryland, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, North Carolina, Oregon, Puerto Rico, Tennessee, Vermont, Virginia, and Washington. A lot of information there. If you really want to read up on the Appropriations Act, there's a link there. You're welcome to explore that in further detail. So back to that slide, as you can see in that first column, farms with 10 or fewer employees and no temporary labor camp activity within the past 12 months, OSHA can't do anything, right? Like there's nothing permitted. OSHA can't do program safety inspections, can't do program health inspections, can't respond to an employee complaint, can't respond to a fatality catastrophe accident, can't respond to imminent danger scenarios, and so on. And also you'll see there consultation and technical assistance, which is what I do. I do consultation and technical assistance. That's not permitted either for farms with 10 or fewer employees, but there is a little bit of a loophole as far as that goes, if state funds are used instead of federal, or if maybe there's something else going on besides farming. So if you have 10 or fewer employees and no temporary labor camp, but you're still interested in using New York State's consultation service, you can still reach out to us. I just have to discuss it further with my boss and see if it's something we can help you out with. So that's just something wanted everybody to be aware of. And again, Nick asked me to talk about it a little bit today. All right, so now on to the main presentation here. Here's our learning objectives. What is the on-site consultation program? What are the benefits of using the on-site consultation program? What are some of the hazards we've identified at dairy farms, and what were the recommended abatement solutions? And how do I sign up for the on-site consultation program? Got a little bit of an asterisk there, just to draw your attention to. This presentation is not a substitute for reading the relevant OSHA standards, right? I mean, you're only going to learn so much in a short amount of time here. So please, you want to be familiar with OSHA standards, actually go ahead and look them up, right? You don't have to buy a book. They're all available for free on OSHA's website, www.osha.gov. Okay, so you want any of that information? Again, it's all available to you completely free of cost. All right, so first off, what is the on-site consultation program? Well, the on-site consultation program is a resource for safety and health issues that is free to businesses, right? Notice how I've got the word free bolded and underlined. It literally is free. If you want to step back a little bit, look at the bigger picture, you're tax dollars fund the program. So, I mean, in a sense, it's not free. Someone is paying for it, but it's free to use, right? There's no fee to use this service whatsoever, okay? So the US Department of Labor and the New York State Department of Labor fund this program, right? So I'm a New York State Department of Labor employee, but 90% of the costs of this program come from the federal government. And what that translated into the last time this was calculated was $3,776,900 of federal funds. So pretty big chunk of change, right, that we're getting. So again, your taxpayer dollars are funding this. You're welcome to use it, right? Take advantage of this great free program. The program helps employers provide a safe and healthful workplace for their employees through professional occupational safety and health assistance. The services offered include on-site consultation surveys to identify safety hazards, right? So that's the main thing that I do. I primarily do safety surveys, go to various types of establishments, right? Could be whatever. I mean, obviously, this is a presentation for farms, but could be any kind of business. Could be a factory, could be a construction site, could be a dentist's office, a store, right? We help out all kinds of businesses, okay? And services we offer also include industrial hygiene surveys to determine air contaminant, noise exposure levels, and other health hazards. We have all kinds of fancy monitoring equipment, like take a look at this fancy looking monitoring device. We got bunches of this stuff. We have industrial hygienists that actually provide these services, and again, completely free of cost. So really nice program. Services offered also include suggestions for mitigation, controlling, or eliminating these safety and health hazards. We're not going to leave you hanging, right? Okay, so we find something. It's not like, okay, here's what we found. It's also, hey, here's what the OSHA standard says. Here's how you should go about correcting this. Okay, and then you have questions, you follow up with us, right? We help walk you through things. Services offered also include training programs after completion of an initial hazard survey. So if you've had an initial hazard survey, you've got a 1-year window for us to come in and provide all kinds of training for you and for your employees. So these are some of the training courses we offer. We have a few others that are not on this list, but as you can see, it's a lot of stuff that we offer, a lot of different kinds of trainings that we go ahead and show up and do for you, again, completely free. So really nice program. All right, so does anyone recall how much the on-site consultation service costs? That's right, it is completely free. All right, it is free to businesses, no fee at all, okay? Whether I'm doing a safety survey, a training, whether we're doing industrial hygiene monitoring, there is no fee, no cost whatsoever for any of this. We're not regulatory, so there are no fines or penalties that are issued, okay? Now, I realize I'm a New York State employee, which there's kind of that sense that some of you may have, oh no, it's the government. The government's gonna come and they're gonna fine me if they find something wrong. I don't have the authority to issue any citations or fines, so you're not gonna get penalized. You get a report, I let you know what was found, but there are no fines, no fees, no penalties, nothing associated with this. So some of you might be familiar with the program, many of you may not be. So maybe some of you know what the main conditions of using the program are, but I'll go ahead and familiarize you. The employer must agree to eliminate the serious hazards that we identify. We'll assist you in this process. You will be expected to follow up and respond to us with the corrective actions taken. So very important, right? If you're going to use this service, you have to agree, okay, if you find something that's serious, Alex, we're going to get back to you and let you know that we fixed it in an agreed upon time frame. If there's a union at your site, an employee representative has got to be allowed to participate, has to have the opportunity to be in on this consultation process. And also too, a list of hazards is provided that the employer has to post. So if OSHA did an inspection, like they'd also provide you with like citations you have to post, but the list of hazards I provide, it's not citations, it's not a document saying you're in trouble. It's an opportunity to share with your employees, hey, these are the things that were found. These are the things you ought to look out for. And it's just intended for your employees. It's not intended for visitors to see this list of hazards. So you post it somewhere where employees would know to look at it, like the employee bulletin board, somewhere where employees, they readily see, right? Someplace easily visible to them. All right, so how does an employer respond to us with corrective actions taken, right? I already said if I find something serious, you got to get back to me, let me know that you fixed it. So how do you do that? Like, what's involved in all that? It's really as simple as filling out and sending in a form, okay? Let's take a look at a real example. Like, this is not something that I filled out. This is an actual example. There's no identifying information. No one's going to see what company this was. That's all confidential. But this is a real example, okay? So here, the employer had not provided fire extinguisher education. This was not an agricultural employer, by the way, okay? So if I show up to your farm, I'm not necessarily going to say you have to provide fire extinguisher education to your employees, but if I show up to a business covered by general industry, for the most part, they have to provide fire extinguisher education to their employees, okay? So here's what the business responded: education provided. They let me know the date that it was provided, and they let me know they provided it. Like, how simple is that? They didn't have to send me any training records. I didn't have to show back up and interview all the employees. Hey, did they really provide that training? No. It was as simple as the employer sending in this form, and we accept the employer's responses. It really is as simple as that. Here's another example. Okay, so electrical outlet box didn't have a cover. Actually, there were two, in this case, electrical outlet boxes that didn't have covers. And the employer responded, cover installed. For instance 1 and for instance 2, same thing, cover installed. That lets me know, hey, the cover is now in place. That is literally all that was necessary for the employer to do as far as getting back to us. They didn't have to send in any photos, nothing like that. Just needed this confirmation, needed this form from the employer. So that is how easy it is to respond to us. In most cases, like I said, a follow-up visit to verify corrections is entirely optional. Most employers just send in the form. I've never had a case where we actually had to go back to an employer to verify. There could be some kind of extenuating circumstance. Maybe the employer asked for an extension and we were suspicious or something. It's never come up for me. There's never been a case for me where we've actually had to say to the employer, hey, you know what? We got to check up on you, except for SHARP companies. That's a special program, Safety Health Achievement Recognition Program. We'll talk about that a little bit later, okay? So again, most employers, they just send in that form, that's it. If you want to invite me back, show off all the great corrections you made, all the great work you did, feel free, but you don't have to. All right, so who thinks that we'll tell OSHA what we find at an employer's establishment? I know some of you might be thinking it, right? Even though I just said we won't, right? We're not there to enforce, we're there to help. But I'm going to drive home the point. Consultations are confidential. They're completely separate from OSHA enforcement activities. The assistance is voluntary. It's at the employer's request. So no one has to do this. It's completely voluntary, and we do not share this information with OSHA enforcement. And also, you as the employer get to determine the scope and extent of the services we provide. Most employers have me in for what's called a full service safety survey, where try to look at as much as possible. If you don't want to do that, you want to just focus on some specific things, that's fine. You get to determine the scope. If we're doing a visit and you get overwhelmed, like, ooh, Alex, that's enough, let's cut this visit now because you already gave me plenty to work on, that's fine too. You don't have to keep going. You determine the scope as the employer. Now, outright failure to correct a serious hazard, that can result in a referral to OSHA. That's something I'm required to let you know about. So if you use the service and we've agreed upon a time frame for you to get back to me, let me know that you fixed stuff, and I'm following up with you, you're not getting back to me, I can't get a hold of you, I keep contacting you, you're not responding, you're not sending in the form, my boss gives it a try, we exhaust everything. Well, at some point, that can result in a referral to OSHA. I'm not going to make the referral. My boss isn't going to make the referral. That's going to go up to Albany. It's going to go up the chain of command, okay, before a formal referral to OSHA gets made, okay? I don't contact someone directly at OSHA. I don't have like that kind of relationship, okay? So it's a big deal if we actually referred an employer to OSHA. In the Buffalo-Rochester district, we have not actually had that happen. My boss, who's been with the Department of Labor, it's something like 43 years now. It's a very long time. So he's been around. He tells me we have never actually had that happen in the Buffalo-Rochester district. So that's how rarely it happens. So if you're planning on being the first, I'm just going to tell you, don't use this service. Like if you think you're going to be the first employer that we have this issue with in the Buffalo-Rochester district, just hold off on using our services, because I don't want one of my cases to be associated with an OSHA referral. All right, on-site consultants will not issue citations or propose penalties for violations of OSHA standards. We will not report possible violations to OSHA enforcement staff, and we also won't guarantee that your workplace will pass an OSHA inspection, okay? I show up, I see what I see, I'm only there for a few hours. You can't expect that I'm going to necessarily catch every single possible thing. I'll do my best, but also keep in mind too, things change from day to day, sometimes moment to moment. So, you know, worker gets up on a ladder and injures themselves after I leave, right? You know, I can only do so much. It's only what I see in the time that I'm there. So what are the benefits of using this program? Well, this program can help to reduce workplace accidents by identification of hazards. It can lessen workers' compensation costs by reducing the number of claims, right? If I find hazards and that prevents an accident from happening and your experience modification with workers' comp goes down, right? That's a cost savings. This program can help to implement safety and health programs required by OSHA, and it can help you to comply with OSHA regulations. Employers using this consultation service are also deferred from OSHA's scheduled inspections while the consultation remains in progress. So this period encompasses the time between the onset of the consultation and the final correction dates, including any extensions. So while that case is ongoing, while that consultation case is ongoing, OSHA cannot conduct a scheduled routine inspection of your work site. Now, if they show up because of a serious complaint or a serious accident, they can override my consultation, all right? But if they're just there for a routine programmed inspection, then they have to come back after we close out our consultation visit. All right, so consider what one workday injury could cost you in terms of both direct and indirect expenditure. Lost productivity, administrative costs associated with injury claims and reports, repair or replacement of damaged equipment and material, reduced employee morale, increased workers' compensation costs, costs associated with OSHA fines, right? Think about that, right? An accident, it costs you money, okay? And also to OSHA penalties. Nick already mentioned this, right? So this keeps going up every year. Currently, we're looking at up to $15,625 for a serious, other than serious or posting requirement violation. That's just one violation, by the way. So, I mean, if there's multiple ones, or as Nick was explaining now, multiple instances even of the same violation, right? So that's a fine potentially for each of those. So even if you don't get hit with the 15,000, you know, you get hit with a few $1,000s for one item, a few $1,000s for another, and it can just add up, right? And then failure to abate, $15,625 per day beyond the abatement date, willful or repeated, up to $156,259 per violation. You might be thinking, does OSHA really hit employers with penalties that high? I mean, I've seen it happen, so I'm going to say yes. Is it normal? No, it's not like the norm, but can it happen? Absolutely. Again, I have seen in excess of 100,000. All right, so there was this study that was done to try to sort out, okay, what are the actual financial benefits of the on-site consultation program? Because it's really easy for me to just say, oh yeah, it benefits you, and also it'll save you money in the long run, right, with reduced accidents and such. But someone wanted to actually quantify this. So as you can see here, depending on which approach you use, like we're talking like around $1.5 billion, right? Like in a year that we can save employers across the board who use this program. So yeah, I mean, that's huge. And if you want to read up on this study, there's a link there. You can read up on that. All right, and also too, a safer environment for your workers can also mean a safer environment for your customers. I don't know if you have customers showing up on your farms. Maybe you do occasionally for meetings and such. Maybe you've got like trucks coming in. I mean, you want your workplace safe, not just for your employees, but also for anyone who visits it. So if you achieve a safer workplace overall, then hopefully anyone who visits it will also by default be safer when they visit. So I told you I'd talk a little bit about the SHARP program, Safety and Health Achievement Recognition Program. That's a very special program for employers who they go above and beyond, right? So they do everything that OSHA expects them to do as far as following standards, but then in addition to that, they're doing all these other things too. And they really do go above and beyond. They have to also keep their injury illness rates below the national average. They have to jump through quite a few hoops to get into this program, and then once they do get into this program, they get recognition. They get their name on OSHA's website. They get a poster. They get a flag. They get across the board exemptions from those routine scheduled OSHA inspections too. Okay, so long as the company maintains their SHARP status. So it's a really nice program, but hard to get into, but great benefits for those who can get into it. Anyways, what are some of the hazards we've identified at dairy farms, and what were the recommended abatement solutions? So as Nick mentioned, hazard communication is always a big thing with OSHA. So the way the agricultural standard's written, right, it says that hazard communication from the general industry standard applies to agriculture as well. So 1910 1200, that's the standard number for general industry for hazard communication. And just to draw your attention again, it keeps showing up in OSHA's top 10. This is the year prior to the one that Nick showed you. So hazard communication just keeps showing up in the top 10 over and over and over. All right, so most of the hazard communication deficiencies we came across at farms, they pertain to workplace labeling, right? You've got like all these secondary containers and spray bottles and pump sprayers, and who knows what's even in them. Someone probably knows, like one person, but then no one else does, okay? And if you have an exposure, you have to know what the chemical is. You can't just start guessing. Okay, you need to be able to find the information, the safety data sheet to give to the emergency service providers and the hospital and such. So container labeling, very, very important, but it's not just container labeling. Ask yourselves, do you have a written hazard communication program in place? Because you're supposed to. Do you have safety data sheets for the various chemicals that you use? Again, you're supposed to have these safety data sheets, and they're supposed to be accessible to employees. And also too, you have to provide your employees with hazard communication training, okay? Maybe some of you have, maybe some of you haven't, I don't know. If you haven't, well, you need to. If there's exposure or possible exposure to hazardous chemicals, and please don't try to rationalize what is a hazardous chemical or what isn't. If there's a safety data sheet on it that indicates there's a hazard, it's a hazardous chemical, okay? Because I mean, I'll have employers tell me, no, we don't have anything hazardous, and then I find the information. It's like, yeah, you do. Here's a carcinogen. Here, this thing's like super flammable. Here, this thing's a corrosive and it'll burn your eyes. I mean, I just, I try to impress upon employers you probably do have hazardous chemicals at your workplace. All right, so another thing that we came across in our various farm inspections, guarding of farm field equipment, farmstead equipment, and cotton gins. We came across numerous pieces of farm equipment that did not have guards in place. Abatement was really as simple as installing guarding. So for example, barn scrappers with unguarded sprocket and chain assemblies and unguarded belt and pulley assemblies, barn fans, manure pump with an unguarded rotating shaft, manure screw conveyor unguarded, grain mill with an unguarded auger, a tractor with an unguarded rear power takeoff. We also found various training deficiencies under 1928-57. So per 1928-57 A6, operating instructions at the time of initial assignment and at least annually thereafter, the employer shall instruct every employee in the safe operation and servicing of all covered equipment with which he with which he is or will be involved, including at least the following safe operating practices: keep all guards in place when the machine's in operation, permit no riders on the equipment other than persons required, stop engine, disconnect power source, and wait for all machine movement to stop before servicing, adjusting, cleaning, or unclogging. Make sure everyone's clear of machinery before starting the engine, engaging power, or operating the machine. Lock out. I put that in red because, you know, for people who think lockout has no relationship to agriculture, it does. Here it is. Lock out electrical power before performing maintenance or service on farmstead equipment. All right. We also found bunches of stuff under the general duty clause, okay? And here's where there's like this popular misconception: oh, farms, like there's hardly any rules surrounding farms. Well, guess what? There are rules, but in addition to the actual agricultural standards, OSHA can get you under the general duty clause, okay, which means you have to have a safe and healthful workplace, okay? So each employer shall furnish to each of his employees employment and a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to his employees, okay? So just because there's not something written in the agricultural standard for it doesn't mean it's not a violation or wouldn't be treated as a violation by OSHA. So here are some of the general duty clause issues that we found at various farms. So manure pit opening with no barricade or signage, abrasive wheel grinder without guarding, no eye wash despite potential exposure of eyes to corrosive chemicals, tight-fitting respirators in use without a medical evaluation, improper storage of welding gas cylinders, unsafe confined space entry, milk tanks, feed mixing silos, fertilizer tanks. Just because OSHA's general industry confined space standard doesn't specifically apply to agriculture doesn't mean that you can just start sending your employees into all kinds of dangerous confined spaces without thinking that through and having protections in place. So anyways, if I've convinced some of you of the value of this program, you may be wondering, how do I sign up? Or maybe I've scared some of you, which I really hope I haven't. But if I've impressed upon you the value of the program and you want to sign up, you can make a request by phone, by email. There's also a brochure on our website, the Department of Labor website, labor.ny.gov. You can print up a mail-in card if you want, but really the easiest way is phone or email. That's the quickest, easiest way to request a consultation. And if you're in Western New York, you can do that directly with me. Okay, so if you're in the greater Buffalo, greater Rochester, Western New York area, you know, all the way down south, Jamestown, Olean, whatever. If you're in this area, you can make that request with me. There's my name, there's my phone number, 716-847-7664. There's my email address, Alexander dot, that dot's very important, grigorenko@labor.ny.gov, okay? Now, if you're not in the Western New York area, but you're still thinking, hey, what a great program, I wanna sign up, here's how you can do that, okay? So if you're outside of Western New York, you can go ahead, send an email to onsite@labor.ny.gov, or there are the phone numbers for the various districts: Albany, Binghamton, Garden City, New York City, Syracuse, Utica, and White Plains, okay? So there are the phone numbers, the contact information for that, okay? And any questions? Is now a good time for me to take questions? However the host wants to do this is fine by me. So if anyone has a question, I'm glad to try to answer it for you.
Thank you, Alexander. If you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the question or the chat, and we can read those out loud to any and all of the presenters. So Alexander, I'll start with a question for you. So if a farm was on today and they decide they want to sign up for the on-site program, regardless of what part of the state they're in, they just call the number of the office that's located closest to them. Do you know what the wait time would be? And I ask that because we're getting ready to get into our busy season. That may vary by office, but can you give us an indication?
Yeah, I mean, I would have a hard time believing that any of the offices couldn't set something up within a month or so. I don't want to like speak for other people, but based on my own experience and my understanding of what things are like in the other districts, I find it hard to believe that they'd put you out further than a month if you wanted to get something in very soon.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
So Nick, we have a question for you. You referred to the UNT visas. There's a question as to what you were talking about with those.
So it gives OSHA the authority to certify witnesses or persons that they may speak to if they have an immigration status that might subject them to be deported or not be able to stay in this country. If we find or identify individuals during our inspection that can help us verify or provide testimony in the inspection about certain conditions existing, we can issue those UNT visas or certification for those visas to keep the employee or keep the employee in the country and avoid deportation or removal while the inspection and the investigation continues and proceeds.
Thank you. So Nick and Alexander, you talked about, the requirements that you have to have more than 10 employees to fall under, OSHA inspections. And you also highlighted, Alexander, that, family members don't count toward that number. However, Nick, I would ask you the question from the OSHA standpoint, if a family member was actually injured on a farm, could that still trigger a dairy LEP inspection?
So they're not covered, they're not counted in the, they're not counted as the number of employees under which we would conduct an inspection. So we have conducted inspections when a family member was involved because the hazard might not only be present to the family member, but also to other members of the farm. So yes, we have conducted inspections when a family member of a farm has been injured, if all the other conditions allow us to conduct that inspection.
Great. Nick, can you remind all of our participants today what the reporting requirements are if there is an accident or fatality on a farm?
Sure. So regardless of size, for any employer, if there is a fatality, it must be reported to OSHA within 8 hours, and that can be done with a phone call, or it can be done going online at OSHA.gov. If an employee suffers an amputation, loss of an eye, or is hospitalized, when the employer first becomes aware of that condition or situation, they have 24 hours before they're required to contact OSHA. And again, that can be done online at OSHA.gov, or it can be done by calling an 800 number, 1-800-321-OSHA, or you can call the local OSHA office to make that report. And the important thing to remember, Tanya, is even if it's suspected that, say, for example, the fatality, heart attack may not be work-related, OSHA would like all employers to report all fatalities to the local area office or through OSHA.gov, and OSHA will make that determination about work-relatedness. So OSHA wants to be informed about all workplace fatalities.
So on that note, Nick, you and I have had some conversations. So we have, on our larger dairy farms, we're using larger trucks, to haul both forages and manure. So what happens if an accident occurs off the farm with one of the trucks? What is the situation there?
Right. So the qualifier would be if it is a highway accident on a public roadway or highway. OSHA does not have jurisdiction for that. OSHA cannot investigate motor vehicle accidents on public highways. OSHA would not need to be informed. As a courtesy, you could call the local area OSHA office because possibly of publicity through media or other news outlets, just to give OSHA a heads up so that they're not caught off guard. But fatalities involving motor vehicle accidents on public highways or roadways, OSHA does not have jurisdiction.
Thank you, Nick. So part 2 of that question is, while you don't have jurisdiction, does that have to go on your OSHA 300 log?
It would not, I believe, go on the OSHA 300 log.
Okay, so if it's considered a motor vehicle accident and there's a injury or a fatality, it does not have to be recorded on the log.
Right.
So let's talk about those logs. Nick, should they have been sent to OSHA by now?
So March 1st was the deadline for electronically reporting OSHA 300 logs to OSHA. And there are some size requirements for that submission. You can submit up until the end of the year, up until the end of the calendar year. However, your submission would be considered late or not meeting the deadline. And if you were inspected, it may result in a citation. So again, you can go on OSHA's website, osha.gov/ITC injury tracking, ITA injury tracking application, and you can find out more information. There has been a slight change in the way we gather that data to try to make it a little more streamlined. If you don't have an account, you need to create an account first and then submit your data through that account.
So Nick, even if you haven't had any injuries or fatalities, should you still submit your log?
Yes, you're required to submit that information even if you did not have any recordables or serious fatalities or other serious injuries. So yes, just like you're required to post that information beginning February 1st to April 15th if you have 10 or more employees, or if you're required under the farm exemption, you're required to post that OSHA 300 log in your workplace in a conspicuous area where employees are accustomed to seeing those types of postings. Even if you've had no injuries, no recordable injuries, or no serious injuries, employers are still required to certify that with the OSHA 300A, posting it from February 1st through April 15th.
Thank you. This question would be for Nick and Alexander. So one of the things, Nick, that we've talked about in our OSHA Dairy LEP committee meetings is the importance of documentation. And I wondered if you could review with the folks who are listening in, because some folks popped on late, what are the requirements for documentation? Does it need to be something formal? If you're, for example, if you're doing a tailgate training, if you're all out and at the shop and everybody's getting ready to get into their truck for the day to go do manure application or go harvest hay, and a manager or farm owner takes 5 minutes to remind folks to do the safety inspections of their trucks and make sure when they get to X intersection that they slow down and cross because people blow through a stop sign, or whatever the training may be, what are some of your tips and tricks for documentation?
So just to expand that a little bit further, a lot of times employers will say, I told the employee, but an hour later they did the exact opposite, or they didn't follow what I was talking with them about, or a week later, so on. So 3 things to keep in mind. 1, certainly you want to document all types of safety meeting or safety communications. 2, you want to have a written set of rules or expectations, safety rules, policies, or procedures. They don't have to be, you don't need a binder that's 6 inches thick. You need to have policies and procedures that make sense for your workplace and address the hazards that your employees are exposed to. So you need to have those policies and procedures and rules applicable to your work site, communicate those to employees, and that could be through safety meetings once a month, once a week, or daily toolbox talks. I would encourage employers to document that, document the people that attended, document who presented, and document the topic that was discussed. And then the other aspect that you need to keep in mind is employers need to have a regular auditing or a check on employees to make sure they're following the rules and procedures, the expectations that the employer has for safety in their work site. You know, you have rules, you communicate those rules, then you need to check to make sure employees are following their rules, the rules that they have for their particular workplace. And then finally, and this is an important aspect, when unsafe behavior or employees are found not following the rules, the employer should have a system in place to counsel, educate, and if necessary, discipline the employee so that they can correct that behavior and move the employee towards safe behavior. All of those aspects that I talked about, it's important to document those so that in the unfortunate event, if there is an accident or an incident, or if even there's an OSHA inspection or a complaint driven by a complaint that OSHA shows up, the employer would have that documentation, that proof that they have an active safety program of rules, education, follow-up, and then corrective action when rules are not followed. So that would be my counsel to any employer, regardless of the workplace.
Thank you, Nick. Alexander, do you have anything more to add to that?
Yeah, so Nick, he's going to be way more knowledgeable than me with respect to what he, because he was an actual OSHA enforcement inspector, what he might look for when he would have conducted an OSHA inspection. Whereas me as a New York State consultant, I do receive training with the OSHA enforcement inspectors. I go to the same OSHA training institute that they do, so I have an appreciation for it, but not to the same extent as Nick. What I would add, though, OSHA standards, for the most part, don't really say you have to document this training and you have to document that training. You know, there's going to be only a few instances where the standard absolutely says, hey, this training has to be documented. But if an OSHA inspector shows up and there's an issue and they think the training was not provided, well, how are you going to prove that it was? The OSHA inspector, they can take employees aside and interview them, and let me tell you, employees will say the craziest things. You could have conducted that hazard communication training the week before. That employee gets asked, hey, did you ever receive chemical hazard communication training? No, what's that? Never heard of that in my life. So you're better off documenting. So please take Nick's advice. You're better off documenting than not documenting, even if the OSHA standard does not specifically say to document.
Right, that's a very good point, Alexander. That's right. OSHA, many OSHA regulations don't require any type of documentation. One exception that we talked about is hazard communication. Specifically in the hazard communication standard, it uses the word effective training. So in that particular standard, the employer needs to demonstrate to the OSHA inspector that their training has been effective. So how can you do that? Maybe through quizzes, knowledge surveys, and things like that. But Alex makes a great point. You may provide training today, and tomorrow or 2 days from now, the employee may have totally forgotten about it. So while OSHA does not require in many of the regulations any documentation or record, it is a good it's good information to have. It's good supporting document. It's good supporting evidence that you have done your part, your due diligence to ensure workplace safety. So my pointers that I was giving you was to you know, what you can do to have an effective, to move your safety and health management program forward, to get to that point that Alex talked about, to those sharp sites, those sites that have effective, highly functioning safety programs.
We appreciate both of your answers to that question, and I think you know what you've demonstrated it is, even if it's not required, it's really helpful both to the employee in case you need to retrain or do those corrective actions, right, Nick, that you talked about, and or to your point, Alexander, to make sure that, you know, employers are protecting themselves. if they invest in training. So thank you both for that. Nick, one of the questions I have, and then Kyle, I'll pivot to you. I don't think I'm seeing any more questions. So folks, if you have them, put them in that chat. Nick, a question I have here from a viewer is, can we expect some dairy LEP inspections this spring or this summer?
So you can always, be, you're on the list. We do have a local emphasis program, so it is possible that OSHA may show up to do a dairy inspection. And the focus of this administration is on underserved, underrepresented populations, and a large segment of that population does work in agriculture in the dairy industry. You can see by the statistics that I gave, during the last year and a half throughout the United States, there were only less than 30 dairy farm inspections. However, in New York State, there was almost 25% of those. So it is possible. It is on OSHA's list. There are a lot of things that are on OSHA's list for inspection. So you can't say never, but you can't say that it's something that you can expect, within the next week or so. I think the important point is to make safety part of what you do each day, make it that core value, just like, production, employee morale, training, productivity, efficiency, factor safety into each part of your work activities and work tasks, and make it a part of doing what you do, not something that you have to do extra.
Really appreciate that, Nick. So Kyle, am I missing any questions?
None that have came in at all.
Okay, great. Really want to thank all of our speakers today. Want to thank Alexander and Nick and Anna and Jim. Want to thank Farm Credit East for hosting, and all of my colleagues and members of our New York Dairy OSHA LEP work group. And just instill in all of you that we need safety is a priority for all of us. We know that. It's part of our core value, as Nick talked about. We all care about our workers, and we want to see them go home safely at the end of the day. And we need to remind our workers that safety is also their responsibility. So it's our responsibility as employers to educate our workers on the hazards that exist in the workplace, make sure that they have the training available to them. But it's also, it has to be a core value of our workers to keep themselves safe and to be safe in the workplace for them and for their coworkers. So please don't forget to make sure that in any of your safety programs, you use that. Want to give a big shout out again to NYCAM. We all know NYCAM is a valued resource, has been for decades in New York State. Let's continue to work together and advocate for the funding that they need to be able to do the safety trainings and safety audits that we need. Shout out to Alexander and the on-site program. I think, we stayed very in touch with them prior to COVID. Just like with everything, relationships kind of, got put on the back burner. So that is a program that's available to you, a free resource as well, as long as you're committed to following through and fixing the safety hazards that are identified by the folks that come out from Department of Labor. And we really encourage you, after today, you have any questions, reach out to us. Farm Credit East has recorded this, so it will be available. We wish all of you a safe and healthy spring as you get out there and do crop work. And thank you and have a great day.